Welcome to Holiday Crawlspace Theatre. I am your host, Alistair Crowe. On this long, frozen night, I invite you to draw closer to the darkness between the walls, where the heat can barely reach and old stories lie in wait. The holidays have a way of dressing fear in tinsel and candlelight. We tell ourselves the cold is harmless, but winter remembers things we think are long forgotten. Tonight, I will present to you 3 tales, 3 carefully chosen hauntings to carry you through the coldest stretch of the season. Stories meant to linger into the quiet moments when sleep refuses to come. Our first tale takes us back to the wonders of childhood, to a time when imagination ruled the night, and toys were more friends than merely just the things we played with. Tonight's opening story drifts into that half-forgotten space between innocence and unease, where wind-up hearts still tick after everyone else has gone to bed. This story is called The Midnight Toy Maker. Winter always seems to come early to Willow Creek, Saskatchewan, a town of 1 co-op, 1 ice rink, and more church basements than people. By December, the prairie wind was already blowing the snowdrifts taller than fence posts, and the only thing cutting through the dark at night were Christmas lights stubbornly twinkling against the cold. The Peterson family lived on the edge of town, past the curling rink and down the road that always drifted over, no matter how often the plows came. Their old farmhouse creaked and groaned as it stood against the frigid prairie winter, while the upstairs still clung to the faint smell of cedar from generations of stored Christmas decorations. This year, Mrs. Peterson had found something special at the Willow Creek Legion's holiday rummage sale. The wooden box was on the floor amongst a seller's things, not on any shelf for actual sale. An elderly farmer had dropped it off before moving to Moose Jaw, and when Mrs. Peterson saw the peculiar-looking hand-carved toys inside the box, she thought they would be perfect for her 10-year-old daughter, Emma. Old-fashioned, prairie-made, wholesome. Emma, on the other hand, was not convinced. The toys were carved with uncanny detail. A wooden rocking horse with real horsehair for its mane. A set of 3 toy soldiers with tiny chiseled pupils. And a jack-in-the-box whose painted grin seemed to get wider the longer one would stare at it. They were also rather heavy, denser than any of the native species of trees in the area. But the oddest part, nobody in town remembered the old farmer. On December 21st, the wind howled across the open fields. Snow hammered against the siding of the Peterson home, turning the windows into frosted mirrors. Emma woke to a soft noise, almost like the clicking of a pen. It came from the hallway just outside her door. At first, she was able to convince herself it was just the old farmhouse settling, as Mama would often console her, until a shadow slid beneath her door. Small, square, and pacing back and forth. Emma sat up, and the door creaked open a crack. There, in the slice of light streaming in from the hall, was one of the wooden toy soldiers, its tiny boots leaving precise little tracks in the dust on the old farmhouse floorboards. Emma froze. The soldier lifted a hand in a stiff salute and pushed the door so it opened wide. Then it turned its head toward the staircase and gave a tiny whistle. The other two toy soldiers began scaling up the step to join their comrade. Suddenly, the rocking horse's head poked up from the top of the stairs, wheels grinding against the wood as it pulled itself up into the moonlit hall. Behind it came the Jack-in-the-Box, hopping gently, its painted face staring at Emma with that huge, almost grotesque smile. Emma could not scream, despite the urge welling up inside her. The cold from the hallway felt too heavy, and it took all of the little girl's breath away. The tiny toy soldier spoke, its voice like wood crackling on a fire.
He is coming. The toy maker is coming soon.
Over the next few days, strange things began occurring around the Peterson home. The toys kept turning up in new places without anyone to help them. Lined neatly on the stairs at the foot of Emma's bed, arranged in a circle on the living room floor. Mrs. Peterson was overjoyed to think her daughter loved the toys so much. The family cat, on the other hand, refused to come back inside. And every night, Emma heard footsteps in the snow outside. Too light to be a person, and too many to just be one thing. By Christmas Eve, in classic Saskatchewan prairie fashion, the temperature had dropped to minus 40 degrees Celsius, with a wind chill so fierce the stars stopped twinkling in the frozen sky. Willow Creek slept early. The whole town had shut down by 8 p.m., allowing the Christmas lights on the houses to become swallowed by the drifting snow. Mr. and Mrs. Peterson went to bed around 10, exhausted from shoveling the walk 3 or 4 times during the blizzard to lessen the shoveling load when the storm finally dissipates. Emma lied awake in her bed, blankets clutched to chin in her attempts to stay awake. But no matter how hard she fought, sleep eventually won out, and Emma drifted off. It was about 1 a.m. when Emma was startled awake. All of the farmer's hand-carved toys stood around her bed perfectly still, except for the jack-in-the-box, whose yellow lid slowly started to rise with a creak that mimicked any of the old farmhouse doors. A small voice escaped from the cracked lid.
He is here, our maker. The toy maker of Willow Creek is here.
The bedroom window beside Emma's bed slowly frosted over from the inside. A tall shadow suddenly cascaded through the window, projected by the moon. Outside in the blowing snow stood the silhouette of a man, but its outline was queer. The limbs were too long, shoulders too crooked, legs like blocks of wood. The shape like a man who had been carved out of a fence post stepped forward wearing a tattered old coat covered in snow and sawdust. Its face was a mask of split wood painted up like Santa Claus, rosy cheeks and all, with a red cracked smile carved ghastly wide from wood-carved ear to wood-carved ear, and eyes black and hollow so the wind whistled as it whipped through them. A long, jagged arm reached up to Emma's second-story window, its sinewy fingers stretching and clawing at the air. The thing tapped on the glass with fingers that sounded like wooden dowels sharpened to a point. All of the toys turned toward Emma. The rocking horse rolled closer to the bed.
It's time to go. All children of Willow Creek must return to him.
Emma scrambled backwards against the headboard of her bed. The hand at the window waved at her, pointed its long, decrepit finger at the latch, and started making peculiar little circles. The latch snapped off, and the window rose on its own. Cold winter wind blasted into the room, and with it the wooden figure. It took a step forward, snow evaporating around its carved boots. "My toys." Its voice sounded like a handsaw dragging through fresh bone. "You have found me another, The 3 toy soldiers saluted. The jack-in-the-box bounced and bowed. The rocking horse rolled and rocked with manic excitement. "Bring her to me." Emma stumbled as all the toys turned and advanced on her.
No!
Emma shrieked. She backed up more, but there was nowhere left to go. The jack-in-the-box sprang, grasping tightly at Emma's wrist with tiny carved fingers. "Come now. Don't you want to be cherished?" The toy maker's breath was like frost in a tomb. "A child is never forgotten when it is made into one of my toys." The toy soldiers swarmed her legs. The rocking horse climbed onto Emma's chest, pressing the air from her lungs. Emma screamed with everything she had, but Mr. and Mrs. Peterson slept. When they came to wake their daughter up for presents in the morning, her room was empty. Emma was not there. All they found was a new, hand-carved toy sitting neatly on her pillow. It was a wooden girl, carved with exquisite detail, still, quiet, innocent, wholesome. And so the toys returned to their shelves like all good toys do, their secrets intact. But childhood wonders have many faces, and not all of them are made of wood and horsehair. Some come as markings on tiny doors, counted down one small promise at a time. Our next tale reminds us that anticipation can be just as dangerous as curiosity, especially when every day brings you closer to something that does not want to remain hidden any longer. Our second story is called The 2024 Door. The Advent calendar arrived on Eleanor Pichet's doorstep on the first morning of December. It had been placed neatly on the welcome mat from some kind soul. There was no return address or postage stamp, just a thick, old-fashioned cardboard calendar illustrated with a snow-blanketed village beneath a stars-filled sky. Every painted window glowed with warm yellow light. Every window except one. The house in the center with the golden 24 emblazoned on the front door. The little house seemed darker than the rest, more vacant. Eleanor stood in the cold longer than necessary, studying the Advent calendar's attention to detail. She felt a sudden chill, looked around to see if someone was around who may have left it, but decided to get back inside where it was warm. Eleanor lived in her late grandmother's house, a place that creaked and sighed with the winter wind. No one ever sent Eleanor gifts. No one was alive whom she remembered. Yet something about the calendar tugged at her heartstrings with a soft, nostalgic ache that could only occur during the Christmas season. She placed the Advent calendar on the kitchen table. It was heavier than it should have been. Eleanor turned the gift over where a single sentence was firmly stamped into the cardboard, nearly tearing through to the other side. Open one door each day. Do not open any door early. The warning felt unnecessary. Eleanor smiled faintly and made herself a cup of coffee. She opened door 1. There was no chocolate behind the door. Instead, she found a small brass skeleton key. It rested in a velvet-lined recess. As Eleanor picked the key up, she was startled by how cold the key felt and nearly dropped it. She frowned. Eleanor owned no locks that needed such a key. Still, she slipped it into the junk drawer for safekeeping and got on with her morning routine of coffee and newspaper. She tried to forget the unease crawling up her spine. That night, Eleanor dreamt of doors. Hallways stretching endlessly, lined with numbered doors that whispered her name. She woke just before dawn, anxious knots twisting in her stomach. She could not quite explain it, but Eleanor had the feeling that someone else had been in the room while she slept. She opened the next door that morning, door 2. A folded scrap of paper lay inside, yellowed with age. Written in cramped, shaky ink were the words, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do it." Eleanor's stomach tightened. The handwriting looked eerily familiar. She studied it for a few minutes before going into her cupboards for an old wooden box filled with her grandmother's handwritten recipe cards. The writing on the scrap of paper matched her grandmother's exactly. But how could that be? Eleanor contorted. The days passed by quickly, and each door held a new object that baffled Eleanor. A baby's mitten stiff with ice, a thimble spotted with rust, though that tinge of red, Eleanor thought, could be blood. A tiny silver bell that would ring softly all on its own. And with each opening door came changes. Her grandmother's house grew colder, no matter how she adjusted the furnace and radiators. Shadows lingered by doorways for too long. Wet boot prints started showing up by the back door in the mornings. They didn't lead anywhere. They were just there. By December 10th, she tried not to open the calendar at all. But the calendar would not be ignored. That morning, the Advent calendar was strewn out on the kitchen table with door 10 hanging loose by the perforated cardboard. Inside was a lock of gray hair tied with twine. She recognized it as her grandmother's hair. Eleanor backed away, heart hammering up her throat. She remembered the night her grandmother died, how she'd been the one who found the once gentle old woman at the bottom of the stairs, neck bent at a wrong angle. The doctors had called it an accident. But the calendar seemed to hum now. A low vibration Eleanor felt through her bones. That night, she heard footsteps in the hallway, slow, careful, like a child counting their steps. She locked her bedroom door tight, curled into a ball, and cried until morning. On December 15th, the calendar no longer showed a cheerful village. The bright red, green, and white paint had started to spoil from its cardboard canvas. The snow had darkened to an ash gray. The windows on the tiny houses were blacked out. Many of the shutters now lay dilapidated. And the single dark house at the center seemed so much closer now, larger, its door carved with door 24. She shoved it into a garbage bag and drove it to the dump at the edge of town. She did not look back after tossing it into the big bin. When she arrived back at home later that evening, she was shocked to find it once again waiting for her on the kitchen table. Door 15 lay open. Eleanor stood over the calendar, trembling slightly. Behind the door on house 15 lay a small mirror. She picked it up and looked at the reflection staring back at her. It took only a moment for her to realize, her eyes widening in horror, the reflection remaining perfectly still. Eleanor screamed, placing a hand over her mouth. Her mirror self stared back at her with hollow eyes and a small, knowing smirk plastered on its face. Suddenly, a bruise bloomed purple around the reflection's throat, fingers tightening around it from behind. A look of horror appeared on its face as it began to fight back. Gasping for breath, the reflection's hollow eyes shot a look of "help me" at Eleanor. Eleanor dropped the mirror, and it shattered into many pieces. From the floor, she could still hear the ragged, desperate breathing of her reflection coming from the broken shards of glass. There was no throwing it away. There was no skipping days. The Advent calendar demanded obedience, or else. Eleanor realized that now, and every morning her hand reached for the next door as if it had a mind of its own. Door 18 held a tiny coffin carved from red cedar. Door 20 held a scrap of frayed red fabric with half a yellow sunflower on it. Eleanor stared at the piece of dress for a long time, the memory replaying in her mind over and over and over again. Her grandmother at the bottom of the stairs, neck bent and broken. The fabric was from the dress which clothed the dead woman. Eleanor had stopped sleeping altogether by December 23rd. Her grandmother's old house was full of sounds. A scratching behind the walls that followed her throughout the house. Muffled sobbing, moaning, and wails from beneath the floorboards. And a whispering voice counting down. When Eleanor reached for the old cardboard advent calendar on Christmas Eve, the village illustration was gone entirely. The whole thing had been painted over in huge blotches of thick black ink. Only one house remained in the middle, dark and uninviting. Door 24. Though, as Eleanor examined the tiny house, she realized it was now her own home, perfectly illustrated right up to the snow piled on the roof. A single light lit up the snow in front of the cellar window. The number 24 on the door looked demonic, glowing in a putrid red and green. Eleanor's hands shook as she read the words that were carved into the porch steps of House 24. Every door must be paid for. With a small brass key from door 1. Heart pounding, Eleanor opened the junk drawer, and there it was. She placed the key into the small keyhole and turned it until she heard a click. Eleanor tried to open the small door, but it was still sealed tight. Tired and near defeat, she sat down at the kitchen table, tapping on the tiny door 24. Not a moment later, the cellar door creaked open slowly from behind her. Eleanor stood at the top of the stairs, staring down at the bottom. Flashes of memories ricocheting inside her head. With a deep breath, she took step by careful step until she reached the earthen floor of her cellar. The smell of old rot and mold made Eleanor wince. It had been decades since she had come down here, too frightened of the memories from that day. At the back wall, a door stood where she could have sworn a wall should have been. The door was wood and iron clasped, weathered and marked with the same putrid red and green glowing number 24 as on the advent calendar. Eleanor stepped closer to the door. She could hear a voice, one which she knew better than her own. "Come on, dear," her grandmother called softly. "It is your turn now, Ellie." Eleanor gasped. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. She wanted to turn around and run back up the stairs, but her feet instead carried her forward to door 24. It was weeks before the police finally forced their way into Eleanor's house after a concerned neighbor called about a light being on in the cellar, as the Pichet residence had been abandoned for years. Police searched the entire house, but it was completely empty. Aside from an old advent calendar laying on the dusty floorboards. A beautifully painted little village with all 24 little doors wide open. Laying inside door 24 was a small brass nameplate which read, Eleanor Pichet. final door closes with a soft, hollow click, and whatever waited behind it settles back into the dark where it belongs. Winter deepens. The cold sharpens its teeth, and far above the world, after a long night spent delivering joy and wonders to sleeping homes, one weary figure turns his sleigh toward home, only to find that the North Pole from which he had left has turned an even more frigid cold. Our third and final tale carries us into that biting silence, where even familiar footprints feel wrong. Our last tale is called Snow at the Threshold. The sleigh runners carved 2 clean lines into the snow and stopped. For a long moment, Santa Claus did not move. Dawn hovered low over the North Pole, pale and unwilling. The reindeer shifted and steamed, bells clinking softly, their breath rising in clouds that quickly vanished from the cold bite of winter. The air held no welcome. It should have smelled of pine resin and smoke from banked fires, of sugar dusted across work tables and leather warmed by skilled hands. Instead, there was only a flattened, uneasy quiet. Santa stepped down from the sleigh. Snow gave way under his boots with a loud crunch. He waited instinctively for laughter, for the hammer song of elves at work. Nothing. The workshop stood silent behind him. No light in the windows, no hammering, no hum of song. Only wind, only the hush that gathers before a storm. He turned toward the house. One door stood open. Light spilled from the inside, not golden and welcoming, but thin and unsteady. It fell across the threshold and spilled out onto the porch snow, hesitant to go any farther. Santa felt the moment stretch. Would the inside still resemble the world in which he had left mere hours ago? His breath left him slow and shallow, and his knees gave way. He sunk into the snow, red against white, face scrunched up, holding all emotion in. The cold seeped in through wool and leather and bone, and he remained, hands pressed into the snow. The door moved with a creak. The wind nudged it wider still, and it sighed. The light inside wavered and settled again. Santa rose and crossed the threshold. The house was unchanged and completely wrong at the same time. His hat still hung by the door. A basket of mittens waited unmended. Stockings sagged on the mantel. Footprints crossed the floorboards, too many, turning back on themselves, ending without reason. Snow had melted into eerie dark shapes. Ornaments lay scattered, unbroken but abandoned where joy had been interrupted. The fire still breathed warmth into the room, which was the cruelest detail. Santa moved carefully now. He followed the spaces in which his family had once filled. The elves lay still, their tools nearby, arranged with malicious neatness. They did not look frightened. They did not even know what happened to them. Then there was Mrs. Claus. She lay beside the hearth, wrapped in her favorite shawl, the one she always reached for on long nights of waiting. The firelight touched her gently, casting shadows that breathed where she no longer did. Her face was calm, though void of the light Santa had grown so fond of. He made a sound then, something old and animal that scraped his ribs raw. He crawled to her, sinking down beside her, bowing until his forehead rested against hers. She was colder than he expected her to be. The house did not creak beneath their weight. Outside, the reindeer shifted uneasily, sensing dread in the air. Santa stayed there, time unraveling around him, until the hearth's glow dimmed. When at last he lifted his head, the world was altered, tilted out of alignment. He stood. The warmth within him had hardened into a thing older than the list he kept, more ancient than the old spells. At the door he paused. He wiped his face with the back of his mitten. The ice hissed where his tears fell. Light continued to spill from the house out into the snow. The sack waited heavy on the sleigh, and the list had new names on it. Names that would never be forgiven. And now the snow settles once more. The door stands open. Whatever lingered on the threshold fades back into the white, leaving only silence. You have walked with us through toys that had a mission, doors that should never have been opened, and a homecoming colder than the deepest winter night. If any of these tales follow you now, creeping into the corners of your thoughts as you try to sleep, take comfort in knowing that stories, like spirits, only grow stronger the longer they are remembered. On behalf of Holiday Crawlspace Theatre, I am Alistair Crowe, thanking you for keeping your ears open and your lights low. Until we meet again, when the cold returns and the crawl space calls. Pleasant dreams, if you can manage them.